I never thought my life would take such a strange turn with just one delivery. My job was simple: drive, deliver books, get signed, move on. No expectations, no attachments, no strings attached. I liked the rhythm: clear, clean, uncomplicated. But then, one Tuesday afternoon, standing in front of the door of 17 Willow Lane, I suddenly realized that there are boundaries that are meant to be kept, and there are boundaries that are meant to be broken. The door opened, and there she was, Victoria Sterling, a woman everyone in this town knew, successful, famous, but also so distant that no one could touch her. But the moment she spoke, all the images I had of this world suddenly shook. "Do you think someone like me deserves to live alone?" That was the question Mrs. Sterling uttered after signing for the boxes of books I had just brought. A question that seemed to be only a passing thought, but in fact, it was like a knife cutting deep into the tranquility that I had built for myself. My name is Marcus. I am 30 years old. I work as a delivery driver for Bookbridge Express, a company that few people care about except for the people who wait for books to arrive at their doors all day. To others, this might be just a temporary job, something they do while waiting for a brighter future. But to me, it is a choice. People often laugh when I say that, but honestly, I choose simplicity. I have witnessed my father, a man who worked hard all his life in a factory, gradually being taken away by machines and illness. In the last years of his life, he lay motionless, surrounded by the sound of a ventilator and IV. He lived a complicated life: debt, responsibility, pressure, hope for a future that never came. And the price was that he died exhausted, without having time to enjoy anything. Seeing that scene, I swore to myself that I would not let my life fall into that spiral. So, I chose this job. Every day, I carry boxes of books, sometimes novels that someone wrote to pour out their feelings, sometimes textbooks containing years of research, sometimes just books to decorate the living rooms of wealthy houses. I don't care where those books will go, who will read them, or whether they can change someone else's life. I just need to deliver them to the right address. Knock on the door, sign, leave. That's how I exist. Without a trace, without entanglement, without attachment. I like to think of myself as a shadow slipping through other people's lives. They never remember me, and I don't need to remember them. But Victoria Sterling's house was different. From the moment I stepped onto the steps, I felt an unusual silence. Not the usual silence, but a silence so heavy that it felt as if each wall was hiding something. When she opened the door, her blonde hair a little messy, her eyes bloodshot, I understood that the perfection everyone talked about her was just a mask. I remember bringing the boxes of books into her office. Everything was so perfect. The books lined up neatly, the polished wooden floor, every chair and table in the right place like a design magazine. But the perfection made me feel cold. It didn't feel like a place where someone lived and breathed. It felt like a museum, beautiful but empty. And then, when I blurted out, "Books should be cherished, because each one is a dream someone poured their heart into," she paused. I saw her eyes change. For a moment, the hard shell disappeared, revealing a woman trying to hide a deep wound inside. I don't know why I paid so much attention to that. I should have done what I always did: delivered, signed, and walked away. But maybe the emptiness of that house reflected me, who always told myself that simple, no fuss was the best way to survive. Then, Mrs. Sterling looked at me and asked in a slightly trembling voice, "Do you think that a life this perfect will ultimately leave you with only loneliness?" That question made me choke. For so many years, I had never let anyone touch my innermost thoughts. But at that moment, in a room full of unread books, facing a woman who seemed to have everything but was so lonely, I found myself drawn in. Before I could answer, she smiled faintly, as if she herself was afraid of revealing that rare vulnerability. However, in just a short moment, I realized this was not a normal delivery. This was the beginning of something I could not control, nor could I turn away from. I, Marcus, an ordinary delivery man, had no idea that when I agreed to stay for a cup of coffee with Mrs. Sterling that day, I had crossed the thin line between the simple life and the complicated life. And once I crossed it, I knew there was no turning back. I didn't intend to stay that day. I really did. If anyone had asked, I could have sworn that I just wanted to leave that house after signing the paperwork, like hundreds of other deliveries. But then Mrs. Sterling looked at me, smiled wryly, and said, "It would be silly for me to make a whole pot of coffee and drink it alone. Don't you want to stay with me?" I should have refused. A simple, "Sorry, I have another order," would have sufficed. Instead, I heard myself reply, "Coffee sounds good." So I stayed. In that spacious kitchen, Mrs. Sterling moved with practiced delicacy. I sat at the island table, my eyes lost in every detail around me. The shiny sink, the vase of flowers placed on the corner of the table, the expensive porcelain cups that showed no signs of use. Everything was so perfect, yet so empty. When she handed me the cup of coffee, our fingers accidentally touched. Just for a moment, but I could feel the cold from her skin. Not the cold of the weather, but the cold from within. The cold of someone who had been without anyone to give warmth for too long. "How long have you been doing this job?" she asked, her voice soft but her eyes so attentive that it made me feel awkward. 3 years, I replied, trying to stay calm. "I like it, simple, no complications. Just drive, deliver, and that's it." I didn't expect that answer to make her silent for a moment. Her eyes wavered, as if I had just knocked on a locked door. Then she whispered softly, "It's not complicated." God, I wish my life was like that. I looked at her, and in that moment, for the first time, I saw clearly the contradiction in a person. Strong on the outside, successful, respected by the whole town, but inside was a deep abyss of weariness and loneliness. I was about to change the subject, but she suddenly asked, "Do you think a person can build a life so perfect that they end up trapped in that perfection?" The question made me choke. I thought of my father, of the years he buried himself in work in the hope of having a complete family, only to end up with nothing but a cold hospital room. I sighed. Success means nothing if you don't have someone to share it with. A beautiful house, a big job, all of it is meaningless if you're alone. She leaned down, her eyes glistening but trying to hold back tears. I knew she didn't want me to see her weakness, but I did. And in her trembling gaze, I realized something terrifying. She wasn't asking for nothing. She was looking for answers for herself. We talked more. At first it was just social. Work, reading habits, little things. But as the conversation progressed, the gaps became more apparent. She confessed, "I don't remember the last time I had a real conversation with someone. Work, meetings, guests, they're all just roles. But here, at least I can breathe like myself." That statement left me speechless. I never thought that someone like her, who had it all in the eyes of the world, would admit loneliness so nakedly. And then she asked something I'll never forget. "Marcus, do you think someone like me deserves to be loved? Or is loneliness the price I have to pay?" My heart pounded. I knew I was on the brink of danger. This was no longer a story about a customer and a delivery driver. This was a cry for help from a soul longing to be touched. I should keep quiet. I should leave. Instead, I looked her straight in the eye and said, "I think everyone deserves someone to see that they really exist." That was the moment it all began. I left her house that day, with that question still ringing in my head. And no matter how much I tried to deny it, I knew I wouldn't stop at just one delivery. A few days later, Victoria Sterling's name appeared on my delivery list again. I didn't dare admit it, but I secretly hoped it would. When I got there, she was waiting at the door, this time with a vase of fresh flowers in the living room, the scent of vanilla wafting through the air. And she invited me in again. This time, it wasn't just coffee. She told me more. I told her more. The layers of defense between us began to fall away. I knew I was entering a complexity that I had avoided all my life. But it was too late. The moment I heard her ask, "Have you ever thought that a casual touch could save someone?" I understood. The incident had happened, and from now on, my life would never be the same again. I don't remember when I started looking forward to the deliveries to 17 Willow Lane. Every morning, when I opened the order list, my eyes would scan quickly, just to see if Victoria Sterling's name was there. And when it was, my heart would beat faster, like a guilty party waiting to sneak back to her secret hiding place. At first, it was just coffee, then long conversations, then afternoons sitting on the sofa in the upstairs library room, where she said, "This is my real library. The books I've read, cried over, loved." No longer were the cold shelves of books to show off to customers. In this small room, everything suddenly became so real that I forgot that I was just a delivery person and she was a famous editor 15 years older than me. We started having secret Thursdays. I didn't need to write it down on my calendar, and she didn't need to text me. Every week, on the same afternoon, I would have a special order at her address. Sometimes it was books. Sometimes it was whatever she ordered just to make an excuse. I would knock on the door, she would open it, her eyes would light up, and the world outside would disappear. Some days, we would just sit in silence, her head resting on my shoulder. I would listen to her steady breathing and realize this woman had been without anyone to lean on for too long. Some days, we would argue about books, about poetry, about little things that no one would notice. And some days, with just a look, I would understand what she wanted: a handshake, a touch, an affirmation that she was still desirable. I knew I was slipping into something dangerous. I felt it every moment sitting in the kitchen when her eyes lingered too long, Every time I left when I could still see her standing at the window, watching my minivan until it was out of sight. Then one day, as I was leaving her house, I caught the eye of Mrs. Henderson, the nosy old neighbor on the street. She stared at me, her eyes narrowed as if she was remembering every detail. I hurried on, but a sense of unease gripped my heart. Victoria was right. In this small town, nothing escapes the eye. As time went on, the relationship became both sweet and heavy. Sweet, because I had never felt so seen. Victoria made me feel important, like I was more than just an invisible delivery driver. Heavy, because we both knew this couldn't be shown. One cold October afternoon, she looked at me and whispered, "Marcus, do you know? I have never felt time pass so quickly as when I am sitting next to you." I smiled, but inside I felt a pang. Time passing quickly meant that the moments together were few, that sooner or later we would have to leave each other. I wondered what she thought when she returned to that big house every night, when the streetlights outside gradually dimmed and only the sound of the clock ticking remained. One time, I dared to ask, "Victoria, are you afraid? Afraid that someone would know about us?" She was silent for a long time. Then she said softly, "Of course, I have built my whole life to get to where I am today. If this were to get out, I could lose everything. But Marcus, I am more afraid of something. I'm afraid of going back to who I was before I met you. Afraid of empty rooms, of dinners alone, of long nights without anyone calling my name. That price is more terrible than any rumor." Hearing that, I felt my heart tighten. I understood that she was placing all her fragile trust in me, a person who had nothing but a pair of hands to drive. And the more I understood, the more I couldn't leave. But it was from that moment that I realized we were walking on a tightrope. Just one wrong step, and everything would collapse. Small signs began to appear. One time, when I stepped out of the back door, I heard whispering behind the fence. Another time, when my car was still parked on the street, I saw the curtains of the house opposite swaying slightly. I knew prying eyes were starting to notice. But the strange thing was, instead of stopping, we clung to each other even more. Perhaps it was because that forbidden feeling made every moment together more intense. Every touch, every hasty kiss seems to contain a challenge to the world out there. That night, when I got home, lying in my cold little room, I asked myself, am I crazy? I promised myself I would stay away from complications. But now, I was rushing into a relationship that could not be simple. And then, in my heart, I heard Victoria's voice that day. "Marcus, do you think someone like me is worthy of being loved?" I knew the answer, and I also knew I could not turn my back anymore. In a small town like Willow Creek, all secrets have an expiration date. Victoria and I tried to hide, to be clever, to keep everything locked in rooms. But then, one look too long, one wrong step, was enough to fan the flames of suspicion. The first person to mention was Mrs. Henderson, IMB, Victoria's neighbor. One morning, as I was unloading groceries at the town supermarket, I heard a whisper behind me. "That's him, the driver. I hear he comes in and out of Mrs. Sterling's house a lot." I turned around and saw two housewives looking at me with a half-mocking, half-curious look. It felt like someone had just stripped me of my thin layer of secrecy. From that day on, people's eyes changed. There were cold nods, there were sarcastic laughs behind my back. In a place where everyone knew each other's business, we became the center of gossip. Victoria noticed it before I did. One afternoon, when I arrived, she pulled me in and quickly closed the door. Her eyes were worried. "They're talking, Marcus. I heard it at the board meeting. They didn't say your name, but everyone understood. I saw their looks." I was silent, just squeezing her hand. But inside, anxiety was pounding. This was no longer a sweet secret. This was a storm that was about to blow everything away. A few days later, what I feared most happened. At a newsroom meeting, a young colleague of Victoria's hinted, "They say Sterling is looking for new inspiration from an unexpected source." The room fell silent, then burst into giggles. Victoria told me that night, her voice trembling. "Marcus, they don't respect me anymore. I saw it in their eyes. Contempt, judgment. What have I done to deserve this?" I hugged her, wanting to tell her that none of it mattered, that I was still here. But I knew that, for someone who had spent her life building a reputation like hers, it wouldn't be easy to let go. Then the news reached her family. Victoria's cousin, a lawyer living in the city, called directly. "Victoria, I heard rumors. Are you having an affair with a delivery boy? Do you think about the honor of this family?" She did not tell the whole story, but simply said, "They say I am ruining everything." That night, for the first time, I saw Victoria sob. Not the usual suppressed tears, but the outburst of someone who had reached her limit. I held her, but my heart ached. I knew that this feeling had become a burden for her, a burden that love alone was not enough to bear. The tension came to a head on that fateful evening. I stopped by as usual. As I got out of my car, I encountered a group of people standing on the corner. In the yellow light, I recognized a few familiar faces, men who frequented the bar and Mrs. Henderson. They looked at me, then up at Victoria's house, their eyes filled with judgment and ridicule. One chuckled, saying loud enough for me to hear, "This town is never short of strange things, a high-profile widow and a delivery boy." I walked quickly into the house, my heart pounding. Victoria heard it too. Her face was pale. She trembled, muttering, "We're not safe anymore, Marcus. They won't let us go." We sat in silence for a long time. Outside, the insects chirped, but inside I was in turmoil. For the first time, I wondered, did I have the right to drag her into this? I love her, but that love is costing her everything she once had. "Maybe," I said softly, my throat tightening. "Maybe we should stop." Victoria turned to look at me. Her eyes were full of tears, but also a flash of anger. "Do you think it's that easy? Do you think I can go back to dinners alone, long empty nights, after knowing you? No, Marcus. I'd rather lose everything than lose you." The words stabbed me straight in the heart. I wanted to believe it, wanted to hold her tight and risk everything. But at the same time, I also understood this was the moment when the tension was at its peak. Just one more step, and either we would fight the whole world to keep each other, or everything would collapse under the weight of public opinion. And then, the rumor was no longer just a rumor. An anonymous post appeared on the town's website. "The widow Sterling, honor or scandal?" The article did not mention my name, but it was detailed enough for everyone to understand. Each word was like a knife stabbing into Victoria's honor. A lonely woman who finds joy in a lowly place. A stain on the Sterling family. When she finished reading, she sat silently, her hands shaking so much that she dropped her teacup on the floor. I knelt down to pick it up, but she stopped me, her eyes looking at me painfully. Marcus, they have decided. In their eyes, I have become a laughingstock. The room suddenly became stuffy. I could see clearly that this was the turning point. We were no longer faced with the choice of whether to continue or not, but whether we were strong enough to bear this storm or not. After the anonymous article, Victoria almost never went out again. She used health reasons to be absent from editorial meetings. I could see clearly that the strong woman of the past was now gradually melting under the weight of public opinion. One time, when I stopped by, she was sitting motionless in the living room, the newspaper on the floor, her eyes lifeless. I called her over and over again until she turned around and whispered, Marcus, I've fought all my life for this respect, and in a few weeks, it's gone as if it had never existed. I didn't know what to say. I just knelt down, took her hand, and whispered, Victoria, you still have me. She looked at me, her eyes brimming with tears, but for the first time I saw the light return to them. Her voice was trembling, but determined. Then let's go, let's leave, before they take everything we have left. The words stunned me. Leaving Willow Creek? Leaving the life she had been attached to for decades? But when I looked into her eyes, I knew. Staying would only mean dying. We made a plan. No one but me and her knew. I sold my old truck, which had been my job for 3 years. She took all her savings out of the bank. We chose a small town in another state, where no one knew Victoria Sterling, where no one cared about a forbidden love affair. The night before we left, we sat in her small library. The yellow light illuminated her face, which was lined with wrinkles but also exuded a rare peace. She leaned her head on my shoulder and whispered, I'm scared, Marcus, but with you, I think I'm brave enough. I squeezed her hand and said, I can't promise you an easy life, but I promise you won't be alone anymore. The next morning, we left in the mist. No one knew, no goodbyes, only the sound of the engine in the silence, taking us farther and farther away from the familiar roads. I looked in the rearview mirror and saw Willow Creek fading away. I felt both relieved and heartbroken. I knew we were leaving behind not just a town, but also pieces of our old lives, our reputation, our jobs, everything that had defined Victoria. But in return, we had each other. On the way, she held my hand and smiled softly. They will say we are crazy, but only we understand. There are things worth more than honor. I nodded, feeling a strange peace in my heart. The future was still uncertain, full of risks, but at least we had chosen a path for ourselves. The path of two people who dared to love, even if that love was rejected by the whole world. A few months later, we rented a small house by the beach. No one called her Mrs. Sterling anymore, just Victoria. No one looked at me as a lowlife, just Marcus, an ordinary man. In the mornings, we walked on the sand together. She often held my hand tightly, as if afraid that one day I would disappear. In the evenings, we read books to each other in the sound of the waves. And in that moment, I realized, love does not need to be recognized. It just needs to be lived truthfully. Of course, There were still nights when Victoria tossed and turned, remembering her old life, about what she had lost. I did not stop her from crying, just silently holding her until she fell asleep. I understood that the wound would never completely heal, but I also knew that, at least, now she no longer had to endure it alone. One afternoon, when the red sunset dyed the sky, Victoria turned to look at me, smiling with relief. If tomorrow we have nothing left, I still have no regrets, because I found you. I held her thin hand, feeling every vein, every trembling beat. And in that moment, I thought to myself, perhaps love does not need a reason, does not need right or wrong. It's simply something that makes us dare to leave the whole world to find someone. And that's the price, and the reward we choose for our lives. If you've heard me this far, you're probably wondering, do I regret it? Honestly, I don't know. There are nights when I lie awake, looking at Victoria sleeping next to me, her face marked by time, and wondering, did I do the right thing? Did I trade my whole future for a moment of weakness? But then, in the morning, she smiles at me, puts the cup of coffee on the table, her eyes still shining with tenderness, and all my doubts disappear. We may have lost a lot, our honor, the peace of our old town, our relationships with friends, our family, but at least we chose to live authentically. There is a truth I want you to understand. Love sometimes does not come at the right time, does not come to the right person as society expects. It comes unexpectedly, makes you lose your heart, makes you scared, and then makes you have to choose. I chose Victoria. She chose me. What about you? If one day you meet someone who makes you believe that the rest of the world is not important anymore, do you have enough courage to choose them?